There you go. So yeah, we'll be recording the first half of this meeting. The second half is more pertaining to you all here at CAP operations wise. But we will start our sustainability education today by talking about the history of Earth Day. If you guys are not aware, Earth Day is coming up April 22nd, so about a month from today. And we'll be sort of going over what that means, why it exists. I think it's really easy for us as humans to see the world around us and just assume it's always been this way. But Earth Day was created for a reason because of all this stuff. So it's kind of cool to learn about the history and know where we came from. First thing, actually, can people online hear me? Robert, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah?
Yeah, I hear you good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I just wanted to give a quick poll. There's no right or wrong here. Just raise of hands. Have you guys ever learned about Earth Day history?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, a couple of us, maybe 3 or 4-ish. Okay. Oh, I also that Lorana University at the bottom. Do you guys have any? Just shout them out. Any ideas what decade the first Earth Day occurred? 60s, 70s.
80s. You're right. It's under 70.
Like the early 70s.
Early 70s, yeah. So
Carter?
we'll see. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. Yeah. So okay. So most people had kind of known that as the 70s was the first Earth Day. And we'll sort of talk about what kinds of contexts the United States led up to the conditions that spurred the first Earth Day. So in order to do that, we have to go back in time. We do that a lot here. But it's important to sort of start with the cotton industry. This was huge. This was America's biggest, after the settlers arrived here at least, biggest industry, biggest export primarily to UK, Britain. Here's just a little timeline, and on the left you can see how insane inside a cotton gin was. This was also at one point was the country's biggest cotton gin factory in the whole United States. So maybe not all of them look just like this, but as you can tell, it was unregulated. There was no rules. Thinking about the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is we really did not have any regulations in place to make sure that people were protected. Also, it is really important to note that this industry was built off of slave labor, and a lot of everyone who became rich because of cotton industry was because they owned slaves. And we'll talk about how this sort of idea of unfettered growth was a big reason why America is the #1 capitalist country in the world, because this is how our country was started. We were started off the principles of business. So from 1619 is around the year that slavery began in the U.S. and the start of the Industrial Revolution was 1793. So that's over a century of slavery, a century and a half of slavery without even industry helping them. That's when it was all done by hand. And in 1793, that's when the first water-powered roller spinning textile mill was opened in Rhode Island. Sorry, I meant to put Rhode Island there. 1863, Lincoln abolished slavery, but as we celebrate the federal holidays, Juneteenth, we actually really celebrate 1865 as the true day when all slaves in the United States were free, because that's when the message actually got to folks in Texas. So just a little bit of timeline and history to wrap your head around how we got here. So this kind of goes up to Juneteenth, 1865. So here we'll pick up in 1860. In the top left, you can see the haze that is just sitting out in the middle of coal was a huge thing that we were getting into now. So the haze was really bad. You can see that 1933 cartoon down there that sort of starts to explain that there's that blue collar worker facing up, Daddy Warbucks, who's basically getting rich off of the backs of blue collar laborers and, even before that, slaves. But people saw in action how you went from $0 to a millionaire, or maybe millionaire, not quite yet in that time, but really just huge spurs in wealth. There was no limit to any of this stuff. Like I said, there wasn't any regulation, and we were known for our production and manufacturing. So when there's no laws to limit pollution, people are going to do what they can for as long as they can, and try to get the laws to not get enacted anyway. So the environment over 2 centuries tremendously deteriorated. In the 1950s and 60s, there was even more pollution because cars were such a huge thing now, and cars were a symbol of freedom and prosperity, and all of these areas where there were urban centers, there was sewage, there was really gross like air quality, there was this smog, like you could say the toxic shroud of pollution settled over New York City for 6 days. This happened 3 different instances in the 50s, and then 2 different times in the 60s. People burned trash. We didn't know how to get rid of trash yet. And it was just generally thought of that if you smelled pollution, you were wealthy. And if you lived in a polluted area, you were wealthy, because there was so much toxic fumes coming out. And at that point, cars were not efficient yet. We were just learning how they were made. So now we have all of these, smog checks, and you have to have a certain, make sure your car's a certain year, certain, in the recent decades or so. None of that existed yet. So it was just really bad. So inspiring Earth Day, what were some of the big things that catalyzed this? So number one, you'll hear this all the time. Rachel Carson is considered to be sort of the birth of the modern environmentalist movement with her book Silent Spring. That book talks a lot about how spring, there were no longer any birds chirping. There was no longer any signs of life because there was pesticide use was uncontrolled, and there was a specific ingredient in refrigerators and HVAC systems at the time called DDT that is now banned. But that specific chemical would get into our waters, get into our wildlife. Birds would eat this chemical, and it would make their eggshells so soft that they never could come to maturity. Birds started dying all over the place because their eggshells were not strong enough to create baby birds anymore. So people stopped hearing birds in the spring. And this book was huge. It sold over 500 million copies, I believe. That could be a wrong quote. Don't quote me on that. A ton of copies worldwide. This was the biggest link for humans to see the link between the environment and public health and our wildlife. And so what happened in the following years, we're trying to get government to do something about it, maybe trying to have some sort of regulation around this. And then there's a massive oil spill in Santa Barbara, California, right off the coast, 1969. Today, oil spills still happen, yes. And in that graphic, it's kind of small in the top left corner, but it says, if today we had an oil spill, we would spill up to 105,000 gallons, roughly 105,000 gallons of oil. Wow. This oil spill in 1969 spilled 3 million gallons of oil into the Gulf, that Santa Barbara coast. So it made it all the way out to Santa Cruz Islands, these Channel Islands here. It was massive, and it was such a visible thing for people to see. People really started to see the physical effects of pollution on their environment. And then the third thing that was sort of happening at this time was protests for the Vietnam War and other wars, just kind of this general underlying unrest and people taking action, ordinary people taking action and trying to take to the streets. And there was this Senator Gaylord Nelson, who was increasingly concerned about all of these environmental problems over the course of these decades and centuries. And so he wanted to sort of revamp take a book from the protests book, or take a page from the protest book, I suppose, and take to the streets, but peacefully protest and just make everyone aware that environment is a national concern, and it was something that wanted to be prioritized by the American people. So how he did this is he arranged sit-ins on college campuses to explain what was happening with the climate, to explain all these environmental issues we were having. And he partnered with a Republican congressman, Pete McCloskey, which plays into sort of the future of where environmentalism headed in government right after this. Because a lot of the time before, environmentalism was really about keeping nature around. It was about keeping nature around so that people could continue to hunt, so that people could continue to fish. A lot of it centered around, we need these areas for wildlife because we want to continue to be able to hunt these things and what have you. So this Republican congressman, Pete McCloskey, that was really where the angle from which he was coming was, this is a right all of us deserve to enjoy. And in order for us to be continuing to do that, you know, we have to find solutions. So how did the congressman recruited Dennis Hayes, a young activist, to mobilize young people around the country. And yes, you are those who said 1970s. The first Earth Day was April 22nd, 1970. And that was when Dennis Hayes, this young activist, came, you know, worked with those two congressmen to mobilize folks all over the country and have these sit-ins. So this is just an interesting quiz. So what do you guys think? Why was April 22nd chosen? Is it because it's the anniversary for a massive oil spill? Is it because it was the only open day for a public protesting permit? Is it because it fell between spring break and final exams? Or was it because it was particularly warm that day? A, B, C, or D? A? What else?
B.
C? B? All right, so it's actually C, because it fell between spring break and final exams, because they were trying to engage mostly college campuses. So they were trying to think of a day where everyone would be on campus, and people were already back from spring break. So that's just a fun fact. It seems like it should maybe be less arbitrary, but it's not. And then, so all of this starts happening. Earth Day was a massive success. This first Earth Day, it was what people referred to as a civil, like the biggest day across the country of civil protests. There wasn't any like looting or damaging or damage to public places. This was all about educating folks who were there and doing it peacefully. All that to say, it did bring it to the national stage, and it brought it to the attention of the government. So based on this, I'm curious what you guys think. Which president birthed the EPA? Was it JFK? Was it FDR? Was it Reagan or Woodrow Wilson?
FDR.
FDR, JFK, anyone else? JFK, FDR? All right, it's actually Reagan.
Wow.
Reagan was the birth person of the EPA because there was a Republican congressman here on this. Okay. The EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. So yeah, and I guess I should have maybe not the JFK and FDR. I could have written those out too.
And he's from California, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. So Ronald Reagan, there is inherent value, monetary value, on keeping natural resources around to continue to extricate them. So that is sort of the lens with which he was going. Also, everyone deserves clean air. Everyone deserves clean water. And so that really, he pushed a lot of things through Congress that enabled clean air, clean water all over the country when local municipalities did not have the resources to do it, especially in these big cities that really had just an unprecedented amount of pollution.
Including Just Say No.
I don't know enough about his presidency. I'm sorry. But yeah, so that's kind of an interesting fact. Like Reagan was a Republican. He was on the right. And we often associate now, present day, the right with environmental pushback and not trying to push forward the industry. But there really is a lot to gain from both sides of the aisle being in on this problem. And there is places we can go. And so that's it. That's kind of it. But I'm going to flesh out these sources. These are not all the sources I use, but I'll send this out today and you guys can look at it if you want. And I wanted to also lead in, I don't have any slides on this, but lead into the fact that CAP Management is going to host an Earth Day celebration on April 22nd. And I would love all of you guys to be there. Really like you guys to be there. We're inviting all of our HOA members. We're going to highlight success stories at each of our properties that have done cool sustainability projects over the past couple of years. We are going to have vendors that are providing take-home education resources for our homeowners. One of those vendors, for example, is an all-electric landscaping company, so they use all-electric mowers, so there's no fumes, there's no sound, actually, was something he noticed. That's what people say a lot, is like, we could be mowing the lawn on a Zoom meet, and someone's on a Zoom meeting, and they can't even tell we're outside, whereas most of the time, it is very loud when you hear a lawnmower outside. So that's an example. We're going to have people from Denver Water talking about a new water conservation funding program for HOAs. We're going to have Excel Energy talking about their Excel multifamily building efficiency program. So I really want this to be a tangible educational take-home event for our homeowners. And I want it to be a celebration of CAP as well. We're going to have a little moment where we talk about ourselves and brag a little bit. And I really want this to feel like a celebration. I really would like all you to be there. It's April 22nd from 6 to 8 p.m. There will be food. There will be alcohol. And this is a free event. We're trying to get folks from within our portfolio and outside of our portfolio to come. Any HOA member is welcome to come. So if you know anyone who's not in our portfolio, they are absolutely invited. So yeah, it's going to be, thank you. It's going to be right across the street where Aaron hosted the last board member boot camp, in Sam Goldsmith's building, that same first level lobby area.
By the
Yeah.
Starbucks.
1125 17th Street.
Thank you. 1125 17th Street. And there is an Eventbrite being launched by tomorrow, and I'll send out an invite to all you guys by tomorrow and today.
Fantastic.
Thank you.